A powerful story can make impossible odds feel less daunting. Once you start to think about stories, you notice strong ones share certain characteristics. A character wants something and faces consequences to not getting it. You might think of a half-hour sitcom you might like to watch. In the first 5 minutes, the main character discovers a problem, and then the rest of the show tries to solve the problem, but fails. Tries something else and suffers. Tries again, and it just doesn't work. And then at the end of the story, just after that last commercial, the main character figures something out and resolves the issue. So fairy godmother doesn't come in with a magic wand and fix things. The main character has to figure something out. Those are the elements of a good story. There has to be a problem or conflict that needs to be solved. And it's hard to gain interest in a story that doesn't have these elements. Stories make science more accessible to audiences of all ages. You can use them to cut through any resistance people may feel. And I have to add, when you love science, it's easy to forget that not everyone feels the same way. One evening, I was a passenger in a colleague's vehicle. As we traveled down the highway, a stunning 3-planet conjunction rose in the sky outside the window. And I kept saying, "Look, look!" And she would not turn her head. Just a few inches, just all she had to turn, and I might have stopped bugging her, maybe. But finally she said to me, "Look, it's not everybody's thing." I was blown away. I did not know that some people just wouldn't even be interested to turn and look their heads at a planet. So it's just important to remember that in your audience, there's just different kinds of people. Some people want the straight facts, but a great many will benefit from a story. So if you have a resistant audience like I did, try to keep a story ready. The hope with presenting those stories and facts is that you will reach more people. My tie to the dark skies began as a child, looking up at the night sky and trying to find the constellations. In a way, I wrote my first book because of light pollution. I was hung up on counting stars in the sky. I never felt sure I was seeing a constellation if I saw my chart showed 7 stars, but I was only seeing 5. I didn't know about light pollution. When my children were young, I wanted to be able to point out a group of stars and tell them the stories associated with these characters in the sky. I thought it would be safer driving if they would look out the car windows instead of hitting each other. And that's a mini story, by the way. Not every story has to be fleshed out. I couldn't find a book that linked constellations and stories at this time, and this launched my Dot to Dot in the Sky series. It partners science and storytelling with mythology from early peoples and ancient cultures. And you can use these types of stories to engage your audiences, and also use books to invite people to spend time on your topic. I really want to stress how books can lead to lifelong interests. As a child, I hooked on the night sky, and I'm still interested. Stories from early peoples and ancient cultures are full of characters and stories that match dark skies. Gods, goddesses, and heroes made mistakes, just like humans, and that's why they're interesting. Their tales often reflect themes or ideals coexisting with the natural world. I used the Zodiac book to encourage stargazers to find the constellation that matches their birthday and discover the stars and stories that go with it. It's a beautiful and personal connection that's hard to resist. You can challenge readers to observe their constellation from different locations and see how easy or hard that is. I used the planet and moon books to connect people in cities to the sky, because you can still see some of the planets and the moon, of course. And I used stories in the Aurora book to tie natural light to artificial light. Animal stories are often easy to tie to unwanted light. Consider the constellations that are animals and stories about them in myths and folklore. There's the bull, the scorpion, the eagle, the whale, the wasp, and many others. You can use these star groups to lead into conversations. You might show the eagle and say, how is a species' natural environment different from its actual environment? Or introduce Taurus and ask, how does light impact farm animals? It's not just about wildlife. And you might say, how is this story setting different from a modern day habitat? Where I live, in Canada, bears are great attention getters. I engage my audiences by inviting a little participation. Let's try it. Raise your hand if you've seen a bear. Raise your hand if you've seen a picture of a bear. Raise your hand if you think the person next to you sleeps with a teddy bear. And so a little thought audience participation with your stories can be very useful. In this story, the stories explained why the bears in the sky have such long tails compared to the bears on Earth. And it starts with Zeus, the king of the gods. Zeus liked a lady named Callisto who lived in the mountains and liked to hunt. But Zeus had a wife named Hera, and she didn't really like her husband talking to other pretty ladies. So she used her special powers and she turned Callisto into a bear. Now when Callisto walked through the forest, she looked like a bear, but she thought like a person. She was afraid of wild animals, and she was also afraid of hunters. One day her son Arcus was out hunting. He saw the bear. He didn't know it was his own mother, so he lifted up his spear to kill the bear. But just in time, Zeus looked down from Mount Olympus. He saw what was happening, and he saved Callisto by turning her into a bear as well. And then he reached down, he grabbed the tails of the two bears, and decided to lift them up into the sky where they would turn to stars and live forever. But as you may know, bears are heavy. He had a hard time getting up in the sky. He pulled so long that their tails stretched. And that's why the bears in the sky have such long tails compared to the bears on Earth. So that's just a short example of some storytelling, and you could use this to lead into dark skies. You could say, you could tie the story to hibernation. What is it like to sleep try to sleep when there's too much light? You could say, how do you act when you don't get enough sleep? I bet you act like a bear. So what could we do differently? You might tell the story of Taurus the bull. Zeus cloaked the earth in a cloud so they could visit Princess Io without his wife Hera noticing. I won't go into the whole story, but eventually Hera asked her servant Argus, a giant with 100 eyes, to guard the bull. And those 100 eyes eventually become Pavel the peacock. You could connect this story to how the eyes of different species respond to light. You could talk about Hermes, the messenger god, who's represented by the planet Mercury, making it easier to tie this to planet viewing. You could talk about how peacocks and other animals at zoos are subjected to artificial light at night. I've seen artificial light shining on zoo animals at nighttime events, and it's really very disturbing. When I'm storytelling, I use images in my books to help me remember the stories I want to tell. This is my story anchor. If I was to talk to you about the Northern Lights, I could tell you some Inuit tales about how some Inuit groups say that the auroras are caused by children kicking a walrus skull around. But in fact, other Inuit groups say, no, that's not how it happened at all. They said walruses are playing a game like soccer, and they're kicking human skulls around. The lights form when they fight over the ball. Some Inuits avoid the lights and carried weapons when they saw the auroras at night. So you could explore this fear of the lights and tie it to dark nights. In ancient and early times, people used to wait all day for a story. That was their chief form of entertainment. And we're not so different today. We just get our stories from different sources, many more sources. But when stories survive for hundreds, thousands of years, you know they're good, and that's why I like to use mythology to promote dark skies. You can use the moon to capture your audience's attention by showing them how to find the face of the man in the moon, the rabbit, a princess, or two frogs sitting on rocks, then hold their attention with related stories. Listening to a storyteller calls for the audience to interact with the speaker, to imagine the characters as they speak, and to interpret meaning based on the presentation. In this story, the moon comes down to earth and he steals from a rabbit. He sets a trap to catch the thief, but the light of the moon blinds him. I can relate this story to dark skies by discussing how does it feel when bright light shines in your eyes? How does that interfere with your activities? Why does it matter? I could talk about different types of light pollution, glare, over-illumination, sky glow, and light trespass. You know how it feels to have light in your eyes and how hard it is to go from very dark to extreme bright. For a short period, you are blind. You can share a personal experience about this and connect it to what happens when animals are blinded by car lights. For some species, recovery can take hours if the light is very bright or if other pollution is present. This story, How Raven Brought the Sun, is an indigenous story from a group called the Tlingit. It tells the story of how the world was dark before the raven managed to steal the sun, moon, and stars from a chief who kept them hidden away. You could connect this story to the evolution of species being tied to cycles of day and night. My interest in astronomy led to my frustration with artificial light, and my interest in scotobiology, the biological need for periods of darkness. When I first raised the topic of light pollution many years ago, the general public knew little about it. I wanted to write a book that would raise awareness, and I felt that readers would care more about the topic if I tied it to animals. I attended an IDA conference and wrote a manuscript and I sent it to a publisher. There was interest, but, and there's often a but when you're trying to get published, he felt my manuscript needed a narrative. I had written it as a straight nonfiction. And I said, well, what do you mean? Do you want me to sneak my facts into a novel? And he said, no, why don't you write stories from your own life about how you got interested in nature and wildlife and astronomy and the night sky? And I said, okay, how about a contract? And he said, write it first. So it was such an incredible challenge. I really feel everyone should do this. I made a list of stories from my own life related to these themes. And this book became Dark Matter's Nature's Reaction to Light Pollution. And I'm thrilled to have it include back cover comments from Canadian astronaut David St. Jacques and IDA co-founder David Crawford. It's also recommended by the U.S. National Science Teachers Association. This book demonstrates something important, and that is that everyone has experiences worth examining, saving, and sharing. My intention is for people to read these stories and say, hey, something like that happened to me, or I noticed that, but I didn't know it was meaningful or important. I didn't know this impacted the environment. I'm going to change, and I'm going to tell other people how they can change too. That's what I want the book to make. That's what I want to happen from the book. You don't have to have had grand adventures to tell a personal story. If your personal experiences make others think of their experiences, you're partway there with your dark sky message. In Dark Matters, I tell a story about my aunt bringing a bat into the house, not on purpose. It had crawled into a pair of jeans on the clothesline, and when she gave the jeans a shake, guess what flew out? I used the story of our attempt to catch and release it to connect how bats are affected to light at night. As soon as I tell this tale, listeners remember their own stories and they want to share them. It's easy to guide the conversation to light pollution, and for those who are not fond of bats, you can raise the importance of biodiversity, or how we wouldn't have tequila without bats to pollinate agave plants. Maybe you have a drinking story you can work in. With 2 billion insects for every person on Earth, most of us have stories about insect encounters. Perhaps you have one you can tie to light pollution. I ask audiences to look higher up next time they see bugs swarming around the light. Bats may be circling even higher. It's a chance to talk about how lights interfere with normal animal behavior. Animals are great attention getters. You might find an opportunity to engage your audience with a live animal and a story. This is Colonel Slade, a barred owl with a job. He's an education owl. The colonel was hit by a car in his younger days, and his lightly light at night interfered with his ability to maneuver safely through his surroundings. I was able to work with the Conservation Society to have him at an event, and this helped me get television coverage on light pollution. Owls are often killed by cars when swooping down roads in search of prey, and I was able to raise this and other aspects of light pollution in this book, which was just released on the day I flew here to New Zealand. It's called Wildlife Crossing, Giving Animals the Right of Way. So sharing stories about light pollution in unexpected places can be a subtle but effective approach to raising awareness about the problem. So a young reader picking up this book at ages 9 to 12, wasn't looking for a book tied to light pollution, but it's related to those lights on the side of the road, and lights on cars. So I'm able sometimes to sneak my messages into other books. In another story in Dark Matter, it was the How and Why book of Space by authors. I described finding an injured bird on the observation deck of the original World Trade Center in New York. I tie this to the problem of birds striking windows at night. Many people have found injured birds, and this story gets them thinking about their own stories and observations. It helps to grow that important emotional connection. A great way to engage others is by tying your message to things they're already interested in. Consider your audience and ask yourself, what do they care about? If you have a mixed audience, think about what is generally popular. You might think of music and tie that to lights at outdoor concerts, or think about sports and the lighting used on sports fields. I chose how light affects animals because this interests my audiences. Also, something to keep in mind if you're talking to kids or youth, they care about things that aren't fair. When you're young, nothing seems fair, and you can use that. No matter where you go, people value fear and hope for the same basic things. Stories that touch on those feelings make listeners apply the story to their own situations, and that's when it becomes magical. The listener personally creates the images, and this has a greater influence. People remember stories longer, and they respond to your message better. Storytelling is playful, but it must still be logical, and that means following the story format, beginning, middle, and end. The play lies in letting the words affect your voice and body so it seems as though you're there in the story. The fun of storytelling allows your audiences to grow open to your dark sky message. Your job is to find an approach that suits your own style, purpose, and personality. You might prefer myths and legends, personal stories, or other true stories. You may recognize a good story when you hear one, but you'll become a better teller if you listen critically. Notice what holds your attention and what makes you long for it to be over. This will help you understand the best way to hold a group's attention. An effective story starts by building curiosity. It starts with a hook so that the listeners stay with you to the end. Think about it. Would you rather hear a story that starts with "it was a hot and sunny day," or "maybe I should have pushed that guy off the pier"? If you hear a story that is clever or interesting enough, you think about it later. If it really intrigues you, you might share it with others. And that is a successful story. Remember, the point is to engage your audience, not to deliver a fully factual and heavily detailed account. When I was writing Dark Matters, I asked my editor, what's more important, recording history or telling a good story? What do you think he said? Tell a good story. That's right. I knew the answer, but I needed his permission to make something up about my sisters. And then I would know if my sisters read the book by whether or not they called me on that story. That's called an Easter egg in a book, when an author hides a little personal joke and waits to see what happens. So start with personal experience, but feel free to be creative. The best stories are the ones you tend to retell around the supper table, campfire, wherever you happen to be. Maybe you have a story about your first telescope, the power going out, knocking over the streetlights. Think of the questions that people ask you or the stories they ask you to repeat. List your stories. Try to come up with dozens relating to the night sky, wildlife, and light, or any other particular theme you're trying to highlight. Don't judge your stories. Don't worry about whether they are perfect or how you will relate them to the theme. Just brainstorm, write them down. One idea leads to another, and you really need to let your mind relax into that process to reach the best ideas. Often we have an idea and we go with it. Our first idea is rarely our best idea. Our first idea is the same idea everyone else thought of. So you have to keep generating ideas and find the one that really has the magic. Something you could do also is look up online or find a good book on it, but story prompts for nonprofits. You can find some specific suggestions like share a story about a volunteer who's made a strong impact. Maybe you have a story about trying to get your friends or members of your family to take the issue seriously. Everybody will have a story. Frame stories with what people want to know. The right framing will get your audience's attention. What's in it for me might stress certain benefits, spending less on energy, attracting tourists. Choose a story that is meaningful to you so that you can tell it well. Like everything, practice is going to bring skills and grow confidence. Your storytelling may convince others that your idea is valid, but sometimes your audience doesn't have the final say. They need to take your story to others with decision-making power. It's the second sale that takes place when you're not in the room. Knowing this, arm influencers with stories they can repeat. This can lead to more stories and darker nights. When time permits, ask your audience to tell their stories. They'll remember more if they tie their own experiences to light pollution. This sounds like something that could get out of control. But you can manage the situation by giving a time limit. Before inviting them, maybe just turn to the person next to them to exchange stories for a few minutes. When the time is up, bring their focus back to you by saying something like, I can tell from the chatter out there that many of you are noticing the impacts of light pollution. This is reassuring. Organizing, shaping, and telling their own stories helps audiences see the meaning in their experiences, and if their stories are well received, they get proof that others find their message meaningful and valuable. That can only help you. Stories work because they allow people to reach their own conclusions and because they reflect human experience. Once people accept a story and listeners retell the story, the teller's influence expands, and that's good for your dark sky message. This is a powerful force. That's why a banned book sells even more. There's a story about a story. The long tread book that is banned. Remember to look for stories everywhere. This is another 2024 release for me, and it's full of stories of how people are making a difference about the causes they care about. It includes a full chapter on space-related issues with stories of how people are making a difference, and it includes a spotlight on dark sky. One of the stories is about a group of 5 students in Tucson, Arizona, who made it their school project to explore ways to make it possible for people in their city to experience a dark sky and figure out how they could best make a difference. It also includes content on how to use storytelling in a chapter on change through the arts. After you've shared your stories, give your audiences next steps. I've been talking about telling stories and using stories in books, but there are many ways to be heard. You might use blog posts or newsletters, videos, social media posts, or traditional media to share your stories. After you share a story, tell your audience what you would like to happen next. Tell them how to reduce light. Tell them how they can get involved. You might suggest they promote the cause through their social media that they already use. Ask them to spread the word to their audiences. Specifically ask them. This is my call to action. Put good science books in front of young people. And I don't just mean my books. Children who read nonfiction will learn to discern fake from real news. We can't expect everyone to grow up and become a scientist, but we can expect everyone to learn to think like one. Remember the role of stories. They build empathy, they connect people to the facts we want to share. And if you're looking at bookseller sites, review titles on light pollution in the night sky. A couple sentences are enough. This armchair activism helps light pollution books show up on recommended lists, and it helps raise awareness. Unless that sounds self-serving, let me tell you, authors might make 10 cents on every dollar you spend on a book, and that's with a good contract. What I want to see are darker nights. We live in a world where a lot of people love and embrace technology, and you can use technology to get people's attention. My technology of choice is rockets. I literally launch my books in rockets, and telling rocket stories leaves my audiences engaged with my content. I can work in using rockets to explore space and why we need dark skies to understand what's out there, and the many reasons why we need to understand our world. I have some new rocket stories to add to my repertoire thanks to a recent experience. I was invited by NASA to be part of the Crew 9 social events at Cape Canaveral in Florida. And this gave me the opportunity to enjoy media access and share my love of exploration, space exploration. I can tie this to the problem of satellites in our night sky. So was that valid? Was that mean I'm completely out of time? I'm completely out of time, okay. Well, my last slide is leave your audience with a story they won't forget. And to be a person is to have a story to tell. I'll just skip that. Light pollution is a problem with solutions, but people need to know about the problem. Use your stories to deliver your message and watch your message spread. I'll just skip ahead. Invite me to your exotic location to talk about storytelling. And I hope if you have a story to tell, you'll come and find me during this conference and share your stories with me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Marie. Now I think we've got time for a question.
Oh. Come on.
I'm very interested in children being their fear of the dark, and what stories you have around fear of the dark, and possibly not only for children.
I haven't specifically written about the fear of the dark for children, but I do when I'm talking to school groups. I talk about giving your eyes time to get used to the dark, and that it's just a different experience. Kids want to prove to each other they're not afraid, so sometimes they get a little competitive with that. And, but I haven't actually explored in that direction.
Thank you very much indeed. And now we have Peter Swanton.